The conclusion of the 77th IATA Annual General Meeting and World Air Transport Summit. It's been, I think, a very interesting day and a half. This is the concluding press conference, your chance to ask us anything you want with respect to the events of the last couple of days. And I think we've got a lot to talk about. So there was the net zero discussion yesterday, the COVID recovery. If we can keep it to content that's related to the AGM and related to the industry level in terms of questions, that would be fantastic. So we'll take questions in the room and online. We'll start in the room, and gentlemen in the second row.
Good morning, I think. Good afternoon. South African Broadcasting. For Mr. Walsh first, could you talk a little bit about the African market in general and South Africa in particular? What do you see as some of the bottlenecks, some of the obstacles to a full recovery there? No vaccinations, you've talked about government action within a limited fiscal space post-pandemic. If you could just talk about Africa in general. And for Mr. Hayes, JetBlue's expansion into Africa, is that something on the cards? I know you fly to Kenya. Are there any prospects of flying elsewhere? Thanks.
Well, I think you've answered your question extremely well yourself. It's principally around vaccination, as we've seen, and it's one of the reasons why several of the panelists, both from within and outside the industry, highlighted the need for vaccine equity, because clearly this pandemic will only truly be overcome when vaccines are available worldwide and available to everybody who needs one. And it's the reason that we've been saying that at IATA. We can't have a situation where people cannot travel unless they're vaccinated, but then they can't access vaccines. So vaccination is the issue that will cause the African market's recovery to lag behind. There's structural issues in Africa which we all know about that have existed prior to this. Africa is a fantastic opportunity for the future. It will be a market that everybody wants to serve. Infrastructure is improving all the time. The airlines have benefited from some relaxation in regulations there, but to see the recovery really gather speed, it will principally be based around getting vaccines made available across the continent so that as many people as possible can get vaccinated quickly.
Yeah, good. And just quickly on Africa, I mean, unless I missed an announcement today, we don't actually fly to Kenya. No, look, I mean, about a third of our capacity is international. We go where the fares are high and the service has tended to be poor. So we're going to continue to build out our international footprint. Africa is probably not on the cards, though, in the near term.
Okay, we'll take a question in the front row.
Hi, Robert Silk, Travel Weekly. So this could be for either of you. Have you gotten any communication from the Biden administration about the specific date for the reopening of U.S. borders? And how important, if the answer is no, how important is it to get that specificity?
So we don't have any clarity on an actual date other than that has been communicated externally. We do expect it, though, to happen in November, and we do expect it to be ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday. A significant number of customers have made bookings already because of the news, and so if the opening is delayed, we're going to face the consequences across the industry of tens of thousands, if not more, of people's flights being having to cancel because they can't come. So we understand that. I think the Biden administration understand that, and we do expect it to be open ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday.
What about a specific date? Is it important to get that now?
Well, as I said, we don't know the specific date yet. That's something that's being worked. But I think the Biden administration understand it's important to communicate that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily be worried about a specific date. I think it's very important that the market reopens. It's been closed effectively since March of last year. So we've all waited for this announcement. I think we're prepared to be a little patient as we get greater clarity around it. But the clear message is there's huge demand for travel on the transatlantic. We've seen that in the charts that you've seen over the past 2 days, both from the economists from the A4A and from our own IATA statistics, people want to travel, and they're looking forward to the opportunity to reconnect with friends and family across the Atlantic. And I think it's a very positive development for the industry. So if we have to wait a short while to get clarity, we're prepared to wait for that clarity.
Okay, thank you. Another question in the room? Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Tanguy Kemener with Agence France Presse based in Paris. On the topic of the single pilot operation, on which ALPA and the ECA have been very vocal, what's the position of IATA on SPO? And does the current boss, Willie Walsh, here agree with the former pilot on the feasibility and relevance of SPO further down the road?
I'm sorry, I didn't fully hear the question.
Yeah, maybe, do you want to try once with the... Yeah.
All right. No, it's about single pilot operation. We've read a couple statements from ALPA and the ECA, and sometimes very hostile. And I was wondering what the position of IATA was, and if Mr. Walsh, as a former pilot, you would agree what position would take on that particular topic.
Yeah, so we have not had a discussion in relation to single pilot operations at IATA. There obviously are single pilot operations, but not on multi-jet engined aircraft. But the issue has not been discussed. It's not a surprise that this is being mentioned because it's been considered for years and years. I think the recent announcement that some airlines were working with manufacturers has sort of sparked the conversation again. But I've no doubt that this is something, if it were to proceed, will only proceed on the basis of strict regulatory oversight and investigation. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen without widespread consultation. And that's assuming, it does happen. So I don't see it happening in the immediate future.
Okay, we'll take a question here.
Hi. Gianni Dragoni, Sole 24 Ore d'Italy. A question for both, two questions for both. Willie, please, about the commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. So what does commitment mean if an airline will not be compliant? And did you get any feedback from Chinese airlines which were suggesting to put off to 2060 after the resolution had been adopted? And Mr. Reyes, please, can you remind me which date is the Thanksgiving Day?
What day is Thanksgiving? It's the fourth Thursday in November. So I believe it's the 25th this year.
The 3rd or 4th?
Sorry, it's the 4th. I think it's the 25th.
Somebody's Googling in the front row here straight away. So
let me know if I'm correct. And I said before Thanksgiving. I didn't say at Thanksgiving.
In relation to net zero, the reason IATA wants to be clear in terms of the ambition of the industry is we now need to engage with regulators across the world. Of critical importance will be the ICAO assembly in October of next year, when ICAO will be looking at a long-term ambitious goal for the industry. And we want to make sure that we're aligned, that our position aligns with those of most governments around the world. What I would say is that I had an email from Chairman Liu at China Eastern congratulating us on the success of the AGM, highlighting his commitment to IATA. He clearly has articulated his position very clearly for several months, but he continues to be a strong supporter of IATA, and I know he would have loved to have been here in person, but we will see him in Shanghai in June of next year. The intention is that he's the host airline CEO, so he will be the president of the AGM as well, and I think everybody will have an opportunity therefore to speak with him, because he'll be sitting in Robin's chair next year, and you can ask that question directly to him. But what I can tell you is he's a very strong supporter of IATA. He congratulated us on the success of the AGM, and he looks forward to continuing to work with us.
Okay, we have some questions online, and one sort of follows on from that with respect to net zero. And the questioner says, given where we are currently with sustainable aviation fuels and the 450 billion litres that we'll need in 2050, is that a realistic progression to expect between now and then?
Absolutely. I've no hesitation in saying it is. People have often argued that it needed the airline industry to send a strong signal to fuel manufacturers that we were prepared to use sustainable fuels and to buy sustainable fuels. I never believed that. But if a strong signal was required, they've certainly got it now. And, I've believed in sustainable fuels for many years, very active when I was at British Airways and at IAG in terms of research into sustainable fuels and indeed investment in sustainable fuels. So I believe it's a very credible option for the industry, and the demand for this product is going to grow and grow, and there will be no hesitation on the part of airlines. And I can tell you, I speak to airlines who say, we've been trying to operate flights with 50-50 blend sustainable kerosene, because that's what's the maximum that's certified at the moment. And in some cases, they can't get the 50% of sustainable fuel. So it's not a case that airlines won't buy, it's that the supply doesn't exist. But I believe the supply is going to start coming into the industry. And there's a very clear and strong message gone out from the industry that we want sustainable fuels, and we want the fuel manufacturers to start producing them at significant volume so that we can progress our commitment to improve the environmental performance of the industry.
Okay, we'll take one more question online, and then we'll come back to the room. The question online also reflects a clear and strong message that the industry gave yesterday, which with respect to user charges at our infrastructure partners. The questioner says airports have strongly rejected IATA statements from yesterday. Was this an expected reaction, and how does IATA react to their reaction?
No, I was shocked when they reacted the way they did. It came as a great surprise that they would try and tell us that we were wrong. You don't need to listen to what I say or listen to what they say. The evidence is there. The airports are putting up their charges. They're announcing all the time that they want to recover. It's no secret. Heathrow will have to go through a process with the CAA. It's going to be visible to everybody, and you'll see what these guys are at. So they will issue lovely press statements to say, Willie Walsh is wrong, and Heathrow, they're fantastic people, and yet they will go and submit applications for massive increases in charges, and they have no shame. So we're here to shame them, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to fight this, and we're going to fight it through every available means. I've been invited to address the board of the CAA, who is the economic regulator for Heathrow. I've been copied. You may have heard. Airline Alliance is taking a position that they normally wouldn't take. So we have to take a stand against this, and I have great respect for ACI. I think they do a fantastic job representing the interests of airports. That doesn't mean that everything they say is true. But if they disagree with what I've said, great. I disagree with what they're saying, and we'll keep fighting. But we're not going to back down just because somebody issued a press statement to say, we didn't calculate the figures right. We did. I know, as a former airline CEO, I know how much I pay airports. Yeah. I know how much they say we pay, and I know how much we actually pay. And, let me tell you, airport charges are a significant drain on airline finances, and the prospect of seeing those charges significantly increase is something that this industry is really worried about. And we in IATA have been tasked by our members to fight against this, and we're going to do that.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a question in the front row.
Will China be open by the next IATA AGM?
When we accepted the offer to have the AGM in Shanghai, we were very clear that it had to be in person. We can't have another situation. It was terrible that we couldn't hold the AGM in Amsterdam. I feel really sorry for Peter Elbers and KLM. It was a big celebratory year for them. This was going to be the highlight of the centenary of KLM, and unfortunately we couldn't hold it there. So we've made a commitment to holding in-person events. We want to hold that in-person event in Shanghai in the middle of June, 17th and 19th of June. Chairman Liu of China Eastern, who has invited us, keeps telling me that he's confident that we will hold the AGM in person on those dates. So all I can say is, that's our plan. I don't have any additional insight, and I've not spoken to any of the Chinese authorities around this, but we're planning to be in Shanghai for the AGM in June of next year, and hopefully all of you will be there to celebrate the event with us.
Okay, we'll take a question in the fourth row.
Hi, Edgardo Jiménez Massó from Aviation Line from Argentina. In relation to the net zero goal, in an interview minutes ago, Mr. De Oliveira from Airports Council International told me that today to build a greener airport costs around 16% more than a regular airport. Jeez. Are you afraid that that cost will go to airlines? Who would pay for that? Who should pay for that?
Well, let me be honest with you. I've used this analogy before. If airports were buying aircraft, they would happily pay the list price. I've never known an airline to pay the list price for anything. And the reason is they have no incentive to reduce their costs because they get rewarded on the money that they spend. And here we have it already. This tells you exactly what you need to know about airports. Everything for them costs more money, because it's in their interest for everything to cost them more money, because the more they spend, the economic regulation for some of these is based on the regulated asset base. So the bigger the RAB, the more money they can make. And therefore, to expand the RAB, they spend more and more money, even where it's not required. And that's why, Heathrow wanted to build an £800 million car park. Where in the world would you see anybody wanting to spend that amount of money on a car park? But they wanted to do that, one, because they could, and two, because it was in their interest to inflate the price as much as possible so they could make a handsome return on it. So I don't accept that it will be more expensive to build a green airport. And I think that's the wrong way to approach it. I think airports can be extremely efficient when they want to be. They need to have an incentive to be more efficient, and they need to be called out when they talk about their commitment to net zero, but then say that they have to increase all their charges to get there. That's too easy. So we will be challenging airports when it comes to the investments that they make.
Okay, another question in the third row.
Hi, my name is Michal from Financial Newspaper in Israel. You have, the question is for both of you, cost on one hand and the need to encourage passengers to go on board. And on the other hand, you have debt, you have competition, and you have the sustainability, which have its own cost. What will happen to the prices of the tickets as the demand will rise?
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. There are examples of many airlines who are able to grow, offer low fares, and also show a great commitment to the communities they serve and sustainability. It is a competitive industry, and the most successful airlines will be the ones that can continue to do that. And just to build on Willie's points on airports, airports that are able to keep their costs down. Airports that are able to keep their user charges lower for airlines. They're the ones that will grow. Where you tend to see a lot of these very high charges are in monopoly airports that are already full because they're really, they can really do what they want. But the majority of airports aren't like that. And in the US, for example, where in many cities and municipalities there's more than one airport that you can fly to, that competition is good. And so, I don't think low fares, I don't think people should be expecting to pay higher fares. In fact, we talk a lot about equity. It's very important that low fares do stay low, because that's what's going to make our industry accessible to all. And if governments just want to make the price, their way they view sustainability, if they just look at that and say less flights and higher fares, that is not equitable-based solution at all.
I would agree with everything Robin said, but I would just comment on, you said we need to encourage people to fly. We don't actually need to encourage people to fly. People want to fly, and we've seen strong evidence of that. The reason that demand, when we report on it, is significantly down is people can't fly, and they can't fly because we have restrictions that are impeding international travel. Once those restrictions are removed, and you saw that in charts that were shown over the last day, there is an immediate response in bookings from people. So actually, we're not in an environment where we have to start taking measures to encourage. It's a very different sort of crisis that we face today, different to what we witnessed post 9/11, when we genuinely did need to encourage people to get back in the air again, or even through the global financial crisis, where price stimulation was a big part of getting people. This time around, people want to fly; they really do, and airlines want to fly them, but the restrictions that are in place today are preventing that from happening. Well, what's influencing price, and Robin has said it. The part of the problem is that the supply has been significantly reduced because airlines have had to take aircraft out of service. So I think in the short term it will be the supply and demand equation. Michael O'Leary has said the very same thing. He said that his expectation is that prices will go up, and the reason he believes prices will go up is that the rebound in demand will outstrip the speed at which the industry can return capacity to the market, for a number of reasons. A lot of skilled people have left the industry. Some by choice, and some, unfortunately, were forced to leave because of the restructuring that airlines had to undertake. A lot of aircraft have been retired from the industry. It will take time to replace those aircraft. Airlines will be more cautious about replacing those aircraft. So there is likely to be a short-term disconnect between supply and demand, and that will influence the prices more than anything else, because, as Robin said, this is a brutally competitive industry. We sit here at an IATA AGM and we're friendly towards one another. We hate one another, and that's the unique thing about our industry. We just want to beat one another up when it comes to competition.
Yeah, he's not talking about him and me.
I was.
While we were on the topic of cost, IATA's called for governments to pick up the cost of testing if they require it. The questioner says, given that governments still tax aviation as a luxury, how confident are you that they will accept that, or how concerned are you that they might put that cost back on the industry?
Yeah, it's our position is influenced by the WHO, who have said, if these testings are required for health reasons, then the cost should be borne by the government. Ideally, we'd like these tests to be removed. I think there's still a lot of testing that is not required. But there's very clear evidence to us that where tests like PCRs have been mandated in countries, the price associated with those tests is way beyond the cost of providing the test. There's plenty of evidence. We did research 6 months ago, maybe 5-6 months ago, which showed that the price variation across 16 countries went from 0. In France, they were provided free. Then I think in Kuala Lumpur it was $27, and in Tokyo it was $270 for the same test. We've seen in the UK, I keep highlighting the UK because of the UK government requirement to do PCR testing after you arrived. The number of tests that have been required, and I've experienced it myself, but the pricing there, the Competition and Markets Authority have said people were being abused in terms of pricing. So that's why we believe if these are genuinely required for health reasons, then the government should pay the price.
Okay, maybe we'll take a question here.
Thank you. Heather Murphy from the New York Times, and I appreciate you all taking questions yet again. It's been a very interesting conference. I have a question. Something that's come up a lot in many different sessions is that it's a confusing time to travel, and another thing that's come up is that the airlines are often having to play a role that previously the government was playing in doing testing or dealing with certain travelers' issues that because of the strange situation we're in. So this may seem like a slightly tangential question, but I think in light of that, something that a lot of travelers are raising is that it's a confusing time for them to travel, so they are turning to the airlines for some answers because they're going to be traveling. And so they're trying to call the airlines, or they're need to change their flight because, as we know, the rules change all the time. And I'm not trying to make this about JetBlue, Mr. Hayes. It just happens to be that you're here, but I'm interested in all of your perspective. It takes around 45 minutes to change a flight on JetBlue. There's no callback. Should airlines offer callbacks? Should airlines have a different approach right now to allowing people to call them because this is such an unusual moment?
Well, I'll answer the question as you mentioned JetBlue. I mean, we definitely saw some very long wait times, much longer than we would like in the summer. As we said, the summer ramped up very quickly. In addition to that, for all the reasons that you suggest, the average number of times a customer is contacting the airline has significantly gone up. And certainly here in the US, you saw all airlines with some very long wait times. I'm pleased to say those have come down significantly. We have hired hundreds of new people to work in our reservations team. I know other airlines have been doing the same thing. A lot of this can be changed online as well, and so a lot of it is making customers aware of that. And then in terms of the callback, I know some airlines offer that. We do actually offer callbacks in some cases, but not in other cases. Depends really on sort of trying to manage peak flow calls. And again, that's functionality I think you'll see us continue to roll out. But I'm pleased to say I get an email every time wait times go above a certain amount of time at JetBlue, and I really very pleased with the progress that we've made since the summer.
Okay. Seth?
Hi. I'm curious, Mr. Walsh, you mentioned the rebound outstripping and demand outstripping supply right now, and Robin also. I mean, in the U.S., the domestic market, that has faded a bit after mid-August into Labor Day, and kids back in school, I think, is probably the issue. You're JetBlue, very heavy VFR, leisure traffic, more than business, more broadly in the industry. Well, if you want to take a stab at this, but do we expect that rebound to be sustained? Do we expect it to be more of a W and have another dip after the sort of pent-up demand is exhausted?
It's a great question, and indeed we debated this with our economics team. I think there was some evidence early on, in the immediate, like I'm talking about in the first few days when cities, countries open, because there are people desperate to visit family and friends. So they've now done that. So maybe there is a bit of artificial, but it's very, very short term. So the work that we've done suggests that this return in demand is sustainable. It can be influenced in the short term by the reopening of the market, but that the general trend is a sustainable growth in demand as people start traveling again. And you're right to highlight the issue of confusion in the minds of customers. This is becoming more and more of an issue. They want to travel. They are unclear as to what they need to do to travel, and then they become frustrated and say, well, I'll wait and I'll do it later when there's greater clarity around this. We'd love to be able to provide the clarity. It's the reason we've developed the IATA Travel Pass, and we provide services to a lot of our member airlines because these rules are confusing. I speak as somebody who has suffered himself as I've tried to figure out what do I need to do. And people don't want to be put in the position whereby they turn up at the airport and realize that they don't have the right forms filled in, or they've taken the wrong test. And had one of my own people just ran up to me there a while ago and he said, I've got to do a PCR. I thought an antigen test was okay. So if we're confused, you have to have great sympathy for people who aren't regular travelers and are looking to travel, and they can't understand what it is they have to do. So we need greater clarity from governments, and that's why we've been arguing that there must be a better way. Governments should be able to agree amongst themselves. Is it okay to do a PCR test 3 days before, or does it have to be 1 day before? And people get, I think this undermines the validity of these tests, because they say, if it's acceptable flying into one country, doing it 3 days before, why isn't it acceptable everywhere? So, we keep pushing for people for governments to try and address this in the interest of, not in the interest of airlines. We can deal with the complexity, but in the interest of consumers.
Okay.
Sorry, can I get Robin to clarify JetBlue's position on the rebound as well?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think you saw the revenue guide that we gave and then updated for Q3, the strongest in the US industry. We certainly did see a bit of a dip as other did post Labor Day, but it continues to be correlated to case counts. And so as the case counts come down, as people then see that they're booking, as Willie said, they want to travel, and there's no sense that we've kind of burnt through the pent-up demand at all. In fact, I still think there were a lot of people who could not even travel last summer because at the end of the day there was only so much capacity who will want to fly next year. So I actually think we're going to continue to see this for a while yet.
We have a question online which says, what does industry preparation for the next pandemic look like, and how would it be different from this one?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think we, as I said in some of my remarks, I think maybe as an industry we were too sympathetic to governments early on, which enabled them to introduce very restrictive measures, which we didn't agree with. So I go back to when I was running IAG, we actually considered taking a case against a judicial review against the UK government when they introduced some of their restrictions. And we felt very confident that we would succeed in that case because they introduced the restrictions, and it was clear if they weren't based on scientific evidence. There was no real assessment of the measures they were putting in. In the end, we, if you like, reached agreement with the UK government. And we had some sympathy, but we felt we needed to take a stand. But as an industry, I think maybe we were a little bit too sympathetic. When it happens again, and I think it's probably a when, because global pandemic was on everybody's risk register, I think we'll have to respond much quicker and try our best to prevent measures that we know are not necessary being introduced, because everything shows us that it's very difficult to get them removed once they've been introduced. We've still talked about living with security arrangements that were introduced post 9/11, when the technology around airport security has significantly improved. The challenge for us will be to try and keep these restrictions as limited as possible and to respond quickly. But I think the airline industry has shown its resilience. You probably heard Scott Kirby when he was talking on the panel yesterday. He said the best thing they did was to respond quickly. He said, they didn't get all the answers right, but they got answers and they moved quickly. And that's what airlines have done particularly well, relative to the sort of crises we would have gone through 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when there was a general view that we can wait for a while and the recovery will happen. Now we know as an industry, when these challenges are presented to us, we've got to respond immediately and take action.
The only thing I'd add is we have a lot of data now that we didn't have when this happened, in terms of travel really not being a vector at all for COVID transmission. And so I do think the post-game review, as the industry sits down with different governments to try to make sure, God forbid, if something like this happens again, we can put more targeted risk-based measures in place.
Okay, we're running a little tight on time, so we probably have time for one last question. Maybe Kurt? Yeah.
A question to Willie. Thanks again for IATA AGM arrangement, and by the way, it was on my 17th. I have a question now, not for airlines and airports, about IATA itself. How IATA actually have survived this crisis, which measures have been necessary, how IATA changed, and I think the importance of IATA have increased for your members?
Yeah, I think IATA clearly has had to adjust its costs because the revenues coming into IATA were significantly impacted by this. IATA is funded principally through the commercial activities we engage in, not through our membership fees. Membership fees are actually a very small part of the revenue base of IATA, but as a lot of our commercial activities are with our airline members. Probably about 60% of our commercial revenues come from airline members. As they had to cut costs and reduce their activity, our revenues were impacted and we had to adjust. So, you know, IATA has gone through a period of restructuring. I believe we are very important to the industry. It's the reason I'm doing this job. You know, I think IATA has a very important role to play. You've heard me say this. I have freedom to say things and to be critical of people, governments, airports, and others that the airline CEOs that I represent can't always do. You know, they would like to say it, but for various reasons they feel, you know, not as free as I am to say it. So my job is to sometimes say very publicly what they will say to me in private, and that, you know, they're not able to say. So IATA is here for one reason and one reason only. You've heard me say this. We're here to serve and represent the members, and that's what we intend to do. And I'm pleased that we're seen by our members as being relevant. We've got to continue to ensure that every day when we're working at IATA, that everything we do is to make us relevant to our members.
Okay, thank you. We have time for maybe one last very quick question if someone has one. Otherwise, yeah, maybe in the back of the room. And that'll be the last question.
Rajesh from Reuters. Listening to you, it sounds like that 2 years, nearly 2 years into this pandemic, demand is no longer a problem for the industry. Is that a correct view of what you're saying?
I think I'll have a good. I think what I would say and what I've heard Willie say and other airlines say is that demand is not the problem. It's the restrictions that are the problem. And we've seen when restrictions are lifted or eased, a significant increase in activity. I mean, I'll give you a JetBlue example. The day that the US government announced that flights from the UK people who are based in the UK could come to the US, our bookings increased 900% on that day. So the demand is there. It's the restrictions and the confusion around the restrictions that is the biggest barrier for this industry recovering. And given how important this industry is for governments, and that's evidenced by the amount of support that different airlines got around the world, the governments need to understand that and work with industry to simplify and ease these restrictions as quickly as possible.
So does that mean that if these logistical challenges are addressed and border restrictions are lifted, the outlook that you have for international recovery in international traffic, will that materially change?
The outlook that we have for international travel is based around when we think markets will open and restrictions will be removed. That's the biggest factor influencing our outlook. So if I look at our original outlook for 2021, we assumed that the US would open in July. Clearly didn't. So the difference between what we had forecast and what we're seeing is because the US market didn't open in July. We've now factored in, obviously, that the US market will be open going into 2022. We've taken judgments on, principally now on Asia, which is the area that's most restricted at the moment. So the outlook that we have is principally based on when do restrictions get removed. And then there's a factor of how quickly can airlines rebuild their networks.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
We'll see you in Shanghai.
Thank you.
Thank you.